we are excited to welcome Hernan Lopez, the founder of Wondery, to our show.
Hi, Hernan. Welcome to Scalable.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We are so excited to talk to you. You have had quite the career from almost 13 years at Fox International to then founding Wondery and now Owl & Co. Tell us a little bit more about you and what took you on this journey.
I started my career in the creative side of an advertising sales team back in Argentina, and I always loved connecting the left side of my brain with the right side of my brain, how product, how creativity, how storytelling connects to business outcomes. And I moved to the US in 97 to start for what was then a small division of Fox International Channels. I spent almost 18 years over there. By the time I left, we had grown to a large organization with thousands of employees all around the world. I had this bug in me for about half the time that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to start something. I was always drawn to entrepreneurial cultures and podcasts. In 2015, when I came up with the idea for Wondery, we're a small industry. It was thought to be $100 million in total revenue. We didn't even know how much it was. And I kept getting the same consumer signal from very few friends who all of them very passionately use the same language. You have to listen to Serial. And the third, fourth time I heard people say this, I finally listened to it. I realized that we were at the dawn of a new wave of storytelling, similar to something that happened in television in the turn of the century. And I was lucky to have caught that bug early on and went on to start Wondery, which led to an amazing journey over 5 years until it was acquired by Amazon. It was another amazing journey for them after I left. And 2 years ago, I started a consulting business called Owl & Company. And we help companies in the media, tech, and entertainment space connect consumer trends with enterprise value. We talk about how time spent turns into enterprise value, something that informed Wondery and informed my work at Fox.
We definitely want to get more into your career a little bit later in the interview, but we want to talk to you first about podcasting, which of course is very top of mind for us as new podcasters, as well as for the industry as a whole, because as you said, it's grown so much since you started Wondery 10 years ago. So was it listening to Serial that really, triggered, your decision to found Wondery? I mean, obviously it was a much smaller market then. So what did you really see then? And was it listening to Serial that really sparked that idea?
That was the consumer signal. I know that's something that every entrepreneur or somebody who wants to start a business should pay attention to. When you have even small pockets of consumers who are saying the same words about a new product that they come across. And with Serial, the level of passion was so unmistakable that I went and listened to it and realized why it was so different. But then I wonder, why is it that there weren't 10 serials? At the time that I listened to it for the first time, Gimlet had already started. So there was a great podcast called Startup about the creation of the company. And I went on to try to find out why nobody had tried to do that before. I realized the companies that should have made those kind of shows were the linear radio companies. And the linear radio companies were not set up for serialized storytelling. I also knew that in general, when there's a consumer trend that drives people to something new, typically monetization models will follow. So if if you build the audience, the revenue will come.
So speaking of monetization models, your firm, Owl & Co., estimated that the podcasting industry was worth $7.4 billion in 2024. First, do you have a more recent estimate, maybe for 2025? And how does that revenue actually break down?
We are in the early stages of creating the 2025 Global Podcast Economy Report. The reason why I decided to do the report last year, and I realized that we were stuck on one study, which I actually helped put forward, the IAB Podcast Revenue Report, that had measured only audio, only advertising revenue, and only the US. And I knew that video had become a much bigger part of total podcast revenue. I knew that consumer revenue had become significant for many companies and publishers. And I knew that global, by definition, was going to be bigger than the US. So I set out to measure all those different sources of revenue with the help of a team. Last year, I don't remember the exact numbers, but the majority of revenue was still advertising. We had more than 2/3 came from ads. But what had been undercounting before was the significant revenue that comes from YouTube. And of course, I'm counting all revenue that goes to podcasts, whether it goes to YouTube and through it to the publishers, or whether it goes to the publishers themselves. But their consumer revenue, there are some apps, for example, Pocket FM, a company out of India, I had not heard of it until 2 years ago. They were making, as of last year already, $200 million in annual run rate. Just one company. Patreon, I remember, was another significant contributor, was making $500 million, if I believe, per year. And obviously, most of that revenue flows through to the publishers.
As we've seen podcasting pivot to video, as you mentioned, what does that mean for the future of the medium as all of entertainment is sort of morphing, right? Like, will we still call them podcasts? What does this mean for the industry as, YouTube shows start going on Netflix and, other creators who aren't actually podcasters are uploading to Spotify? It feels like we're in this moment where everything is coming together.
I do hope we continue to protect and preserve the name podcast and that we call them podcasts going forward. We should talk about whether video is needed for everybody. I don't believe that that's the case. But it's really expanding the potential audience. And the reason why video is so important is that YouTube made a concerted decision, however many years ago, to make a bet that people want to watch podcasts, not just listen to them. And as a result, other platforms, Spotify most notably, responded by supporting and leaning more heavily into video. And because video discovery algorithms were in general better at resurfacing new content, or at least that's what is most widely understood than an audio only. The audio RSS feed is great for established brands. We obviously, I Wondery, build a business on RSS, but you tend to get the same audience every week. And there's something great that's habit forming, but the flip side of that is makes it very difficult for a new podcast to come into your habit. Mm-hmm. So YouTube essentially solved for that. And as an extension, as a result, video has become part of the podcast language.
Definitely want to hear your predictions about what's coming next. I have to ask, what did you make of the Golden Globes adding a podcasting category? And what did you make of the nominees and the winner, Amy Poehler, which I predicted, actually?
Amy Poehler is great. I obviously, you cannot have a show that is just more rewarding to watch and listen to than Amy Poehler's, and she's incredibly talented. Do I wish she had gone to somebody who had been doing podcasts for a longer time? Part of me, yes, just because I'm rooting for the people who have been in the industry, but I 100% think that Amy Poehler's show is amazing. So I'm very happy that she got it. I think it was very smart of the Golden Globes to expand the category. They have not added categories in a long time.
So earlier you said that podcasts should still be called podcasts, but Wondery actually was pretty early in having their podcast converted into TV shows. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and what you think makes for a good podcast TV show?
I think, and I'm glad that we actually made the distinction very clear, because let's put an example, Dying for Sex, the podcast. It was narrated by Nikki Boyer. I love her. We just saw each other on Sunday, the same day that Michelle Williams won the Golden Globes. The show, the podcast, has the actual audio of the real people in that went through the story and editing, and it can do some of what a television show does, but it's a narrative documentary, strictly speaking. It's everything that is in the podcast is is narrated as it happens with her editorialization. In television, for a number of reasons, because it's a scripted adaptation, it's a dramatization of the true events, the creators, the showrunners, are able to expand beyond what actually happened and give themselves then creative licenses that make the show land in a different way. And they're both incredibly different media, and they're both rewarding to watch or consume. The podcast to TV process that we had at Wondery always started with, we wanted to have stories that resonated with listeners emotionally, that they were character-driven stories. And because I came from television, I knew how buyers of television essentially prioritize some kinds of stories over the other. We chose the podcasts that were most likely to expand into television shows. And we got several of them made out of 30 at that option.
So you said that not all podcasts should be video. So say more about that. What podcast should be audio only? And it feels like it's hard to not do video now in this environment. So tell us more about that.
So I didn't think, for example, Up First, right? One of the nominees that the other day, or The Daily from the New York Times. I think those kind of shows there's always a trade-off between how much video you do and how much editing you can do. And there's always a trade-off in getting guests to be available at the time that you need it and for the time that you need them. You guys probably are familiar with the show Acquired. And they are very famously audio only. They do amazing, very heavily edited 4-hour episodes. And the kind of work that they do would be really difficult to do with video, although sometimes they do video interviews. What I think is now table stakes is that every podcast needs to have a video strategy. And that video strategy is a minimum clips to be shown on Instagram and other short form platforms, because discovery is essential, and podcast clipping, it's becoming its own marketing vehicle, and it's actually spread its own cottage industry. There are companies that make significant amount of revenue from Joe Rogan clips, for example.
Let's talk a little bit about predictions and what you expect from the industry. So what would you say is the single biggest structural shift in the podcasting business in the, say, next 5 years that people are still underestimating?
I don't know if I would call it a structural shift necessarily, but it's a product innovation. I have predicted already that we're going to see vertical podcasts. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the show Subway Takes. That's on Instagram. That is, to me, a new format, and I call it a vertical podcast because the underlying trend, and Alan Cole will publish some work about this over the next couple of weeks, is that vertical is the default mode on mobile. And the apps that lean on vertical are actually winning time spent. In the last year, Instagram, of all the big apps, gained more time spent than any other app. We resist turning our phone back sideways. We don't do it unless we really have a reason, like we are going to sit down to watch a movie or play a game. Other than that, the default mode is vertical. So when we started producing this episode, remember I asked, is this shot vertically or horizontally? I'm sure that you'll have vertical clips for promotion, but I predict that if I watch this show in 5 years from now, the default will be vertical.
Microdramas have also been something that you have been paying attention to lately. So what were some of the early signals there? And do you think they're going to break into the mainstream in a big way this year?
Yes and yes. So my very first area of interest was before I started Wondery. I was obsessed with this idea that because I worked at a movie and television company, and we knew that movies had been made to fit into a television set, we thought that television shows and movies could be made to fit into a mobile phone. And in theory, they can, but that's not what they were designed for. So my first idea before Wondery was something very similar to Quibi. And luckily, I was talked out of it by a colleague of mine who then, John Langroth, who then, when I told him about Wondery, he said, oh no, that is actually a good idea. This thesis that mobile content needs to be designed for that screen has been with me for a long time. And if you think about short form has been around for decades. In fact, short form movies preceded feature films. That's what the word feature film exists. Short form television has existed as well, but there's never been a way of monetizing short form until YouTube. And YouTube has been great for pretty much everything except for scripted serialized content. Right? There aren't any ways of monetizing at scale scripted serialized. So microdramas, which started in China in about at the end of 2020, have been essentially plugging a gap in consumer demand and supplier offering. And I think we are now at an inflection point so the whole industry was worth $3 billion outside of China, of which a little less than half was in the US. But I think you're hearing more and more about it because a lot of scripted talent who work in television as well are finding a way to express a new story and to monetize it through this medium. But I said in my reports, as short dramas are a subset of this much bigger space called vertical video. Vertical video is $100 billion industry already outside of China, so of which short dramas are $3 billion, and that's, I think, is going to increase in share. But those $3 billion are the ones that matter to the scripted entertainment producers.
All right. Well, we'll have to talk to you 5 years from now, and maybe we'll be in vertical. But we wanted to move on and talk to you a little bit more about your founder journey and hopefully get some advice from you as well as first-time founders in this space. So you have now founded Owl & Co. Tell us about that. I mean, what gap did you see in the market for this?
There are consulting companies like BCG, McKinsey, that have lots of history and very big teams that come and solve solutions for large companies by definition. And they come in for 3 months and they'll charge you 7 figures. And there are some smaller consulting firms that are more specialized and smaller, more affordable, and have more of a higher touch. But it's just a smaller version of what McKinsey and BCG do. What Allen Company seeks to do is to create relationships over a long period of time with companies in the media entertainment space. We're now working with different divisions of the top 4 global studios, with 4 independent studios, always in the streaming or television content production. We work with startups, and our areas of expertise all had to do with streamonomics, essentially the theory of what drives the economics of television, film, music, podcasts, creator content, and sports streaming. And today, everything is streaming. It's a completely different founder journey from Wondery, because this one we are a 3-person team, obviously supported by a large network of experts that come from my experience at Fox and then at Wondery, but it's not meant to be a VC vehicle, right? The way that Wondery was.
Looking back at your time at Wondery, was there, a certain decision or most important decision that you made that materially changed kind of the company's trajectory?
So many, and the first one that I can think of was launching Dirty John, right? And it wasn't really necessarily a decision, but rather landing that product. It came to us through the LA Times. The LA Times wanted to create their version of The Daily. And so they called me in for a meeting. There were no podcast companies like us in LA. So in some respects, I got lucky. And I told them, don't launch The Daily. If you want to follow what the New York Times did, think about Modern Love as the model. It's a column that is based on a newspaper article that is easier, that it's ongoing, that you don't have to produce 5 days a week. So I asked them, what articles do you have that somehow are in the territory of Modern Love? And as just it happened, they had been reporting on Dirty John, the newspaper story, for about 6 months. We started to work together with Christopher Goffard, the writer, and we created this model of essentially publishing simultaneously one day newspaper article and then the same day the podcast. And it really took off. There was a before and after Dirty John for Wondery.
Is that your biggest win as a founder, or would you point to something else?
I think my biggest win was to create a brand, and this was very deliberate. From the beginning, we had a sense of what the Wondery brand meant. The model for me was Marvel. So you go and watch a Marvel movie and you immediately know that it's a Marvel movie or Pixar. And that's rare in movie studios. In podcasts, up until Gimlet existed, Gimlet also had a very distinct brand. We wanted people to hear a show, listen to the first, even before we had the Wondery Sonic logo, and feel that, okay, this feels like a Wondery show. We had a Sonic identity. We had a specific kind of script. We had a narrative story arc with cliffhangers and characters and protagonists and antagonists. And all that contributed to the idea that people felt that Wondery shows were different from other shows. Obviously, it was easier to be distinct at the time because there weren't that many podcast companies available. But one of the things that flatters me the most is when people either recognize the Wondery sound or feel that they were inspired by the Wondery sound.
And tell us a little bit about the decision to sell to Amazon. Obviously it's a huge company, but it's never an easy decision to exit. So talk to us a little bit about that thought process and why you decided to go with Amazon.
It was 2020, a difficult year in a number of ways. So the pandemic was a difficult year for me personally. You guys can probably, if you're not familiar, you can listen to my or read my LinkedIn post. I was going through some challenges that luckily are behind me. And towards the end of the summer, I started to feel that some of the buyers in the industry, Spotify in particular, and SiriusXM, which had just bought Stitcher, and Spotify already bought Parcast, The Ringer, and Gimlet, may not be as interested in buying yet another podcast company. So I started to, my advisors got inbound. They had a number of people reach out to them and say, would Hernan be interested in entertaining a conversation? And Amazon was not one of them, actually. But once they got retained, we went through a process. And the people at Amazon were very clear from the early conversations that they were serious about the company. And we had an amazing conversation and process over the next couple of months, and one that ultimately concluded in a good place. Obviously, they had growing pains, as any companies acquired by another one always has, but they're, I think, 5-6 times bigger than they were as far as total revenue than they were when it was an independent company. So I think it was overall a good outcome.
And what was that process like emotionally, right? This is a company you founded so early on. Like, what is it like to let go and then, watch the company, like you said, go through growing pains and changes and all of that stuff from the outside?
It was made so much easier because my team went with the acquisition, and I knew that obviously I was rooting for them from the outside. It's always difficult and a little emotional, and you have to catch yourself without saying before I would do X or would not do Y, because it's from the outside everything looks easier. One of the things that I practice at our companies is I advise with a large degree of empathy because I was in that seat before. I know that decisions are difficult. I know that executives have conflicting objectives and tensions. So none of what all these large companies do is easy. And I was, I think, in many respects, able to just be proud that Wondery under Amazon was going to be much bigger than Wondery under the small independent team of 65 people, who all of them but one state.
We asked you kind of biggest win as a founder. So what's the biggest mistake you've made as a founder and what did you learn from it?
I thought that it was going to be easy to raise money. And I went on to scale the company, went from 0 to 6 employees, immediately thinking, okay, the money will come right away. And the money didn't come for 2 years. I really struggled the first couple of years to raise money, and for all good reasons that had to do with the market being small. The interesting thing is, if I had known how difficult it was going to be the first year in particular, I may have not started Wondery. So sometimes you have to go through through those mistakes in order to get to success.
So, final question. What advice do you have to us, either as first-time founders or as first-time podcasters?
As first-time founders, I think you're already following this, which is you're both doing work that you love so much that you would do it for free. This is the framework that I can't remember who told me this for the first time, because the founder journey is difficult, and it's not for the not for people who quit. So you have to genuinely love what you do every day. And as far as podcasts are great for long form conversations, but the world is moving towards shorter form. So mastering how to do 30-minute sweet spot is essential.
We will keep that in mind as we keep experimenting. But thank you so much, Hernan. It was great to have you on the show.
All right.
Thank you.
So much for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing you both in person next time in LA.
Same.
Thank you.